August 6th, 2026. President Donald Trump goes on Truth Social, all caps, as he always does, and tells the world that everything in the Iran war is going beautifully. Vice President J.D. Vance goes on Fox News and says, I'm quoting verbatim, it's going to go in a place that is good for the United States of America. Sounds very confident, right? But that same day, the Washington Post breaks the story that Trump himself had screamed at Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at Camp David because he felt he'd been lied to about the state of the war. The munitions crisis that I analyzed in detail in my last episode, the White House immediately denied it, called it fake news. Trump then threatened to imprison the leakers. Long-term jail sentences will be sought. Okay? Let that sink in for a moment. When a president has to threaten prison for people leaking internal information, you know the situation on the ground doesn't look anything like Truth Social, right? But here's what the media completely missed. While the entire world was glued to the Strait of Hormuz, what's Iran negotiating with Oman? Is Trump going to bomb or not bomb within 48 hours on August 6th and 7th? 3 geopolitical earthquakes happened simultaneously. And not a single news outlet, not CNN, not Al Jazeera, not the BBC, connected these 3 dots together. Earthquake number 1. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan signed a trilateral defense pact in Jeddah. The press called it Islamic NATO. America's closest allies in the Middle East just declared, we're saving ourselves. Earthquake number 2. The European Union flatly refused Trump's request to send European navies into the Persian Gulf. Kaja Kallas said it straight. This is not Europe's war. Meanwhile, America was using the Graham Act S-5025 to strangle Europe's economy, and Morocco was being used as a migration weapon to tear the EU apart from the inside. Earthquake number 3. Russia was collecting $760 million a day from oil, while the Pentagon was quietly drafting a new nuclear strategy, admitting that America no longer has enough conventional weapons to fight Russia or China. Today, I'm going to show you why August 6th and 7th, 2026 was not a normal day in the Iran war. This was the day that America's post-Cold War power structure, the thing they call Pax Americana, began to crack into 3 pieces. And I'm going to explain it to you using a concept that Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster warned about back in 2003. He called it the vampire fallacy. Okay, let's go. In 2003, a U.S. Army officer named H.R. McMaster, who would later become Trump's own national security advisor, wrote a document called Cracks in the Foundation, okay? In it, he laid out an incredibly important concept that he called the vampire fallacy. The idea is very simple. The American military establishment believed that high technology, drones, AI, satellites, precision-guided missiles would transform war from something chaotic and unpredictable into an equation that could be solved by computers. You just press a button, the missile flies, the target is destroyed, the war is over. Clean, quick, cheap. Sound familiar? Sounds like an iPhone commercial, right? I always tell my students this. Imagine you're playing chess against a child. You have a computer analyzing every move. You can see the entire board on a 4K screen. You're confident you'll win in 10 moves. But the child isn't playing chess. The child picks up the board and smashes it into your face. That's what Iran did to the United States. February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. In the opening hours, they killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Washington believed this decapitation strike would cause Iran to collapse immediately, like killing a vampire with a wooden stake, right? One shot, done. But Iran is not a vampire. Iran is a 3,000-year-old civilization. Mojtaba Khamenei succeeded his father. The IRGC tightened its grip on power. And instead of collapsing, Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz, cutting off 20% of global oil supply. Oil prices skyrocketed. The world plunged into the worst energy crisis since 1973. 5 months later, August 2026, America's munitions stockpile was depleted. I already analyzed the specific numbers in detail in my last episode, ATAC-EMS, Patriot, THAAD, tens of billions of dollars in costs, so I won't repeat them. You already know. But what matters more than the numbers is the mindset behind them. McMaster called it the exquisite fallacy, the belief that a small number of high-tech, expensive weapons can substitute for mass and scale. Iran crushed America's arsenal with cheap drones and missiles hidden in tunnels. Pure asymmetry. Okay? But the munitions are only one part. The vampire fallacy has 3 other cracks that I want you to see because they explain why America fell into this situation in the first place. Crack number 1, ignoring the warnings. Before the war started, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking generals in the American military, warned President Trump that if he launched a preemptive strike, Iran would blockade the Strait of Hormuz. But Trump trusted the computer simulations, algorithms that assumed the enemy would behave rationally through a Western lens. The computer said Iran would surrender. Trump dismissed the warnings from his own generals. Result: the strait closed immediately, exactly as the generals had said. But by then, it was too late. This is what the military calls the soda straw view, looking at the battlefield through a drinking straw. You have hundreds of thousands of hours of drone footage. You have a digitized command system called Command Post of the Future. Very nice name, right? But this system only displays your own force icons on the map. It's completely blind to complex terrain, local populations, and Iran's asymmetric booby traps. You see everything, but you understand nothing. Crack number 2, and this one is truly terrifying. AI native information warfare. Iran distributed deepfake videos fabricated by AI, showing the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln on fire at sea. Completely fake. But it spread so fast that, and I'm dead serious about this, President Donald Trump himself was fooled by it before his own generals could correct the record. Let that sink in. The commander-in-chief of the most powerful military on earth was deceived by a fake video on the internet. McMaster calls this data friction. Information technology didn't clean up the battlefield the way people promised. It created noise, millions of fragments of information being copied, fragmented, manipulated, and American intelligence couldn't filter through it. Crack number 3. March 2nd, 2026. Kuwaiti air defenses shot down 3 F-15 fighter jets, American F-15 site, friendly fire. The investigation concluded that the fault was not human. The fault was in the autonomous AI software at the Combined Air Operations Center, CAOC, at Al Udeid Air Base, Qatar. The AI system made the wrong call, and no one could intervene in time because they had delegated the decision-making to the machine. 3 American pilots died because they trusted AI, okay? And Iran understood this dependency perfectly. They knew the US was using cloud computing, Amazon Web Services to process intelligence. So what did Iran do? They bombed the AWS data centers in the UAE directly in early March. Boom. S3, EC2, DynamoDB, the entire AI intelligence infrastructure of the United States went dark instantly. America was literally blinded. Meanwhile, and very few people know this, Iranian state-sponsored hackers from a group called Handala infiltrated water control systems, pumps, valves, pressure regulators in at least 12 US states. Minnesota, Michigan, Georgia. You know what method they used? Default password scanning. Default passwords. The drinking water infrastructure of the world's #1 superpower, protected by the password admin 123. Right? That's the vampire fallacy in its purest form. Pour billions into protecting sophisticated military systems while the civilian water supply is wide open. And the final crack, McMaster calls it self-deception. When a military organization distorts data to report inflated results to its superiors. CENTCOM, US Central Command, turned its X page into a disinformation rebuttal channel with a claim/truth format. Allegation, truth. Sounds very professional, right? They appointed themselves the referee of truth on the battlefield. Then Minab happened. The US fired a Tomahawk missile at a target in Minab, which turned out to be a school. At least 150 people dead. CENTCOM refused to comment. But the New York Times exposed the truth. American forces had bombed based on outdated targeting data. Old data. Wrong target. 150 dead. The organization that declared itself the referee of truth killed 150 civilians because of garbage data, then tried to cover it up. When exposed, their credibility collapsed completely. America's information campaign became a strategic failure. You see the pattern? 4 cracks, munitions depleted, deepfakes fooling the president, AI shooting its own planes down, intelligence lying to itself. All from the same root. The vampire fallacy? The belief that technology will replace human judgment in war. McMaster was right back in 2003. You cannot win a war by pressing buttons from a distance. War is about people. It's about will. It's about culture. It's about history. Computers cannot calculate willpower. AI cannot measure national pride. And when Trump simultaneously declares everything is wonderful while threatening to imprison anyone who leaks bad news, you know where the truth is? Right? Does that make sense? Okay. Now we get to the first front. And this is the one I think matters the most. August 7th, 2026, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. 3 leaders sat down together. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, President Erdogan of Turkey, and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan. They signed a trilateral defense agreement, expanding from the bilateral Saudi-Pakistan Strategic Defense Pact of 2025. The media called it Islamic NATO. Now, on the surface, it looks like a normal defense pact, right? 3 countries cooperating militarily. Big deal. But let's peel the layers back. Layer 1. Why these 3 countries? Saudi Arabia, money. The world's largest oil economy. Turkey, defense industry. This country manufactures the Bayraktar drone, the Altai tank, indigenous warships, completely self-sufficient, no need for America. Pakistan, nuclear weapons, the only Muslim nation with the atomic bomb. You put those 3 things together, money plus defense industry plus nuclear capability. That's not a defense pact. That's a new power pole. Layer 2. What drove them to do this? The answer is very simple. Fear. Not fear of Iran, fear that America can't protect them anymore. For 5 months of war, American bases at Al Udeid in Qatar, in the UAE, in Riyadh, were continuously penetrated by Iranian drones and missiles. Air defense systems ran dry. I analyzed this in detail in my last episode. America couldn't even protect its own forward positions, so how could it protect its allies? And here's the detail the media missed. US and regional intelligence confirmed that the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guards, was directly commanding Houthi forces in Yemen and militia groups in Iraq, preparing coordinated attacks on Saudi ports and energy facilities. Okay? The Houthis weren't acting alone. Iran was controlling them remotely, like playing chess. Every pawn has an owner. On August 7th, the Houthis launched missiles that killed 58 soldiers at Marib and Hadramaut and shelled Najran in Saudi Arabia directly, killing 11 civilians. America stood there and did nothing, because there was no ammunition left. Meanwhile, the Iranian parliament was considering a bill banning all ships associated with the US, Israel, and hostile nations from transiting the Strait of Hormuz until Tehran receives war reparations. And for other commercial vessels, a transit tax of up to 7% of cargo value. 7%. On every ship that passes through. Do you understand what that means? Iran is turning the Strait of Hormuz, an international shipping lane, into its own private toll booth. And America doesn't have enough ammunition to stop it. And one more detail that very few people noticed, Iran's internal politics are fracturing, but in a more dangerous direction. President Masoud Pezeshkian, considered the moderate, the one who wanted to compromise with America, had to go on television and deny resignation rumors 28 times. 28 times. He admitted that communicating with the new Supreme Leader Moshtaba Khamenei was extremely difficult. The hardliners, the IRGC, the Assembly of Experts, had completely isolated him. What does this mean? It means the only person in the Iranian government who wanted to negotiate is being strangled by his own system. The hawks are in charge. And as J.D. Vance said on Fox News, there are people within their system who are crazy radicals who want the war to continue. He's right, but it was America's own bombing campaign that put those crazy radicals in power. I always use this image. Imagine you live in a neighborhood and there's a big, strong neighbor who says, don't worry, I'll protect the whole block. Okay? You believe him. You don't buy a lock, you don't install cameras because the big neighbor will take care of everything. Then one day a burglar shows up. The big neighbor goes out to fight but gets beaten up. Broken arm, injured leg. You look out your window and see him, the man who promised to protect you, lying on the ground, calling for backup. What do? Do you keep trusting him or do you go buy your own gun? Do you think that's the moment the Arab nations decided to buy their own guns? Layer 3, and this is the most dangerous layer, nuclear weapons. The official text of the Jeddah Pact does not mention nuclear weapons, but when journalists asked senior Saudi officials, they refused to deny it. They said, and I'm quoting, the new alliance is comprehensive and includes all military capabilities. All military capabilities. Okay? This is what the military calls outsourced deterrence. Saudi Arabia doesn't need to build its own nuclear bomb. It just needs to sit next to Pakistan, which already has the bomb, and let the world draw its own conclusions. Strategic ambiguity, the beauty of it is you don't need to say it out loud. You just need to not deny it. Does that make sense? Okay? Now we fly over to Europe, the second front, and this is where the story gets really dark. August 6th. The EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas, flatly rejected Trump's request to send European navies to the Persian Gulf. She said, we will not allow ourselves to be blackmailed or dragged into America's war with no exit. This is the first time since the Cold War that Europe has said no to America in that tone of voice. But why? The answer comes down to two words, Lindsey Graham. Senator Graham passed away, and in his honor, the U.S. Senate passed Bill S-5025, the Lindsey O. Graham Sanctioning Russia and Iran Act of 2026. by an overwhelming vote of 86 to 12. This bill imposes tariffs of up to 100% on any country that continues to buy Russian oil and gas. Okay? Sounds reasonable, right? Punish Russia for the Ukraine war. But here's the trap. Because America's own Iran war closed the Strait of Hormuz, cutting off Middle Eastern oil supply, Europe had no choice but to buy more Russian gas to avoid economic collapse. Slovenia was already rationing fuel. The Irish government collapsed. So what is America doing? America started a war that left Europe short on oil, then punished Europe for having to buy Russian oil, then demanded Europe send its navy to help America at Hormuz. Okay? That's not an alliance, that's extortion. And if you think the Graham Act is the only weapon America used to subjugate Europe, then you haven't seen Ceuta. Ceuta is a small Spanish city on the coast of North Africa, right next to Morocco. You might ask, what does Ceuta have to do with the Iran war? Everything. Spain was the only country that refused to let America use its airspace during the Iran war. The left-wing Madrid government said no. Trump wanted to punish them. Morocco is an Abraham Accords member, a close ally of Israel. In April 2026, America signed a 10-year military modernization deal with Morocco. The American Enterprise Institute, AEI, lobbied for the U.S. to recognize Ceuta as Moroccan territory. Then Morocco opened its border. Thousands of migrants flooded into Ceuta. Spain accused Moroccan police of actively guiding migrants across. Italy immediately reimposed border controls against Spain. Schengen, the foundational principle of free movement in European integration, was under threat. I tell my students this, and many of them are shocked when they hear it. But migration is the cheapest weapon on earth. Cheaper than drones, cheaper than missiles. You don't need a $2 million tomahawk to destabilize a country. You just need 10,000 people walking across a border, okay? In 2015, the migration crisis nearly tore Europe apart. Brexit happened partly because of immigration fears. America and Israel understand that. They know that migration is Europe's Achilles heel. The Ceuta incident was a pilot program, testing how panicked Europe would get. And once you know it works, you can use it anywhere. You hold a faucet, you control the flow of people, you turn it on and off like a water tap. You see the structure now. The Graham Act strangles Europe's economy from above. Migration from Ceuta tears European society apart from below. Two pincers, one objective, force Europe to submit. Buy American weapons, keep funding the Ukraine war, maintain the dollar, and never dare say no to Washington again. But the story has one more layer, the deepest one. Look at the map. Where is Ceuta? Right at the Strait of Gibraltar, the only gateway into the Mediterranean Sea. Through the 10-year military modernization deal, signed in April 2026 with Morocco, America and Israel, if they help Morocco take control of Ceuta, would directly control the shipping lane into the Mediterranean. Now combine that with what? The Strait of Malacca. America already controls that. The Arctic route, America is targeting it through Greenland. 3 choke points, Gibraltar, Malacca, the Arctic. 3 bottlenecks controlling the entire flow of European commerce and blocking China's influence. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is choke point control strategy. When you no longer have enough conventional strength to spread across every front, you concentrate on controlling the bottlenecks. Whoever controls the bottleneck controls the flow. And the ultimate goal, create an unstable Europe so that global capital, technology, and finance flows where? To Israel, which portrays itself as Pax Judaica, the Jewish peace, the only shield strong enough to stand against the Islamic world. A weak Europe is not an accident, it's a plan. But, and this is interesting, Europe is not submitting. The EU used 1.4 billion euros in interest from frozen Russian assets to self-fund Ukraine. They accelerated the fragile air defense shield project, a purely European system, no dependence on American Patriot missiles. And they're preparing unilateral trade sanctions against goods from Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Europe is slowly cutting the umbilical cord with America. Slow, but irreversible. Okay, final front. And if the first 2 fronts were about America losing its allies, this front is about America's enemies feasting. Russia collects $760 million every single day from oil. Let me say that again. $760 million every day. Monthly energy revenue doubled to $24 billion. All thanks to America's Iran war pushing oil prices to record levels. This is what I call, and this is my own conspiracy theory, I could be wrong, but I call it the arsonist paradox. America lit a fire in the Middle East to control oil, but that fire enriched Russia, their number 1 enemy. Russian oil money flows directly into tanks, drones, and missiles to fight Ukraine, the very country America is trying to protect. Does that make sense? America is indirectly funding a war against itself. And Putin knows it. He's playing chess, real chess, not chess on a computer. On August 6th, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson declared Moscow is ready to consider constructive ideas, but only from American negotiators, not Ukraine. You understand what that means? Russia wants to talk directly to Washington, cutting Kiev out of the conversation, turning Ukraine into a pawn being bargained between two great powers. That same day, a Russian cruise missile fell into Poland. Russian drones penetrated Romanian airspace. Senator Roger Wicker, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, condemned it, saying this was the direct consequence of Trump pulling forces from Eastern Europe. And when Zelensky desperately begged for more Patriot missiles, you know what Trump said? America needs missiles too. America needs Patriots more than Ukraine. The reality was even worse than the words. Washington had quietly frozen weapons transfers to Ukraine, redirecting interceptor missiles meant for Kyiv to the Middle East to protect American bases. When Zelensky found out, he publicly accused the US and EU of playing air defense hot potato, that it was really a scheme to pressure Kyiv into being humble, accepting territorial concessions to Russia. Okay? The president of Ukraine, the ally America had pumped tens of billions of dollars of weapons into, is now accusing America of betrayal. That's the level of trust collapse we're talking about. Let's stop for a moment. America, the largest military superpower in human history, just said it needs patriots more than Ukraine. That's not the language of a global hegemon. That's the language of a country running short. And Russia isn't the only one who noticed. The Graham Act S, 5025, the bill imposing 100% tariffs on anyone buying Russian oil, is pushing the major Asian economies into a defensive posture. China and India, two of the world's largest economies, are being forced to tighten de-dollarized economic ties with Russia to avoid what they call sanctions from hell from Washington. You see the paradox? America uses sanctions to protect the dollar, but those very sanctions are pushing the biggest economies in Asia out of the dollar system. America is destroying the thing it's trying to protect, right? And this is where the story becomes truly frightening. Because when a superpower loses the ability to fight with conventional weapons, you know what they do. They pull out the last card, the nuclear card. That same day, August 6th, NBC News revealed that the Pentagon is building a new nuclear strategy led by Elbridge Colby, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. This strategy focuses on tactical nuclear weapons for regional conflicts against Russia and China. Okay? I need to explain to you why this matters. Since the end of the Cold War, America relied on conventional strength, aircraft carriers, F-35 fighters, Tomahawk missiles to maintain global order. Nuclear weapons were just the insurance of last resort. Nobody thought they'd actually have to use them. But now, after 5 months fighting Iran, conventional weapons are depleted. You already know the numbers from my last episode. America is admitting, through actions, not words, that it cannot win a conventional war against Iran, cannot win alone against Russia and Ukraine, and cannot win against China over Taiwan. So it's tactical nuclear weapons. Escalate to de-escalate. Drop a small bomb to avoid having to drop a big one. You know, this reminds me of Dostoevsky. Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov believed he was a Superman, that he stood above the law, that he could kill an old pawnbroker and suffer no consequences. He believed in his own rationality, that the ends justified the means. America is the same. They believe they are exceptional, American exceptionalism. That they can use tactical nuclear weapons in a controlled manner. That you can drop a small nuclear bomb on a battlefield without triggering World War III. But Dostoevsky shows us every action has consequences. Nothing is controlled when you're talking about nuclear weapons. And Russian analysts have warned very clearly. Konstantin Bogdanov from the Russian Academy of Sciences explained Colby's thinking. Colby has long been an advocate of the concept of controlled nuclear escalation, viewing it as a structured and reversible process. The core idea is to strengthen deterrence by deploying nuclear weapons that are easier to use. Easier to use, okay? Let those three words sink in. Nuclear weapons, easier to use. Dmitry Trenin, chairman of the Russian Council on International Relations, went straight to the consequences. Instead of strengthening Allied security, the United States will face growing national security threats. Regional conflicts could escalate into global conflict. And Russia isn't just warning. In 2024, Russia updated its nuclear doctrine. Any attack from a non-nuclear state backed by a nuclear power will be considered a coordinated attack. Ukraine hitting Russia with American missiles. Russia considers that America attacking Russia. And Russia warned explicitly, if NATO countries host American nuclear weapons aimed at Russia, Russian nuclear forces will treat them as targets. And one more detail that few people noticed. Russia declared that any future arms control treaty must include France and the United Kingdom, the two NATO nations that possess nuclear weapons. Previously, nuclear negotiations were just US and Russia. Now Russia says no. If NATO is a bloc, then the entire bloc must sit at the table. China, meanwhile, refused to participate at all, saying that whoever has the largest arsenal must disarm first. Result: nobody's negotiating with anybody. New START expired in February 2026. The treaty that limited each side to 1,550 strategic warheads and 700 delivery vehicles, with nothing to replace it. For the first time since 1972, the world has no nuclear arms control treaty whatsoever. Okay? Now I'm going to do what I always teach my students to do: steelman the argument. Build the strongest possible case for the other side before you critique it. Right? Someone will say, "Professor, you're being too pessimistic. America still has 11 carrier strike groups. America still spends 3 times more on military than China. American GDP is still the largest in the world. The dollar is still the global reserve currency. And Trump, whatever you think of him, is still negotiating, still in control. And yes, America is still the most powerful military force on the planet. Nobody denies that." J.D. Vance said on Fox News, "We're going to use all the tools that we have, military, economic, diplomatic, to make sure we bring this thing to the right resolution." And he's not wrong. America still has many tools. The Jeddah Pact? Just a statement of intent. No joint forces, no command structure, nothing concrete beyond signatures. EU rebellion? Europe has talked tough with America many times before, then come crawling back. Russia profiting? Sure. But Russia's economy is still smaller than California's. That's the strongest argument. And much of it is correct. But that argument rests on one assumption, that absolute military strength equals actual power. And this is precisely the vampire fallacy that McMaster warned about. The Soviet Union had 40,000 nuclear warheads in 1989. It still collapsed, not because it lacked bombs, but because it lacked trust. The Roman Empire had the most powerful military in the ancient world. It still collapsed, not because it lacked soldiers, but because the frontier provinces stopped believing in Rome. August 6th and 7th, 2026 matters not because America lost a battle. It matters because America lost trust from 3 directions at once. 1. Gulf allies no longer believe America can protect them, so they form their own alliance. 2. Europe no longer believes America acts in the common interest, so they refuse to cooperate. 3. Enemies like Russia and China know America is running low, so they're testing the limits. Aircraft carriers and missiles don't solve a trust problem, okay? Empires don't collapse because they run out of weapons. Empires collapse because their vassals stop believing in the emperor. That's the lesson of every empire in history, from Rome to the Mongols, to the British, to the Soviets, and now possibly to America. I could be wrong, but that's what the data shows. Okay, now we come to the final part, and I'm going to give you 3 predictions. You know my rule. A good prediction must connect the past, explain the present, and point to the future. If it can't do all 3, it's just guessing. Prediction number 1. The midterm elections are coming in November. Trump is stuck in a lose-lose position. He can't escalate because the arsenal is depleted, but he can't concede because he'd lose face. Professor Robert Pape from the University of Chicago said it perfectly. Trump will need a symbolic victory. Maybe seizing an island, a beach on the Iranian coast. Not to win the war, but to have a good photo before the election. Watch September and October. If Trump orders an amphibious landing on an island in the Persian Gulf, you know election day is coming. Prediction number 2. The Jeddah Pact will expand. Egypt, a member of the R4 group that met in Riyadh in April, will be the next candidate, maybe Indonesia, Malaysia. This Islamic NATO model isn't going away because the reason it was created, American impotence, isn't going away. And pay attention to this. Pakistan has been given the role of leading negotiations between Iran and America, a nuclear-armed country which just signed a defense pact with Saudi Arabia, now standing between Washington and Tehran as a mediator. That is an enormous power shift that most Western media completely ignored. Prediction number 3, and this is the scariest one. Kobe's nuclear strategy will trigger a new nuclear arms race within 12 months. New START expired in February 2026 with nothing to replace it. Russia declared it will treat any attack backed by a nuclear power as a coordinated attack worthy of a nuclear response. China refuses to negotiate. America is pushing tactical nuclear weapons into Europe and Asia. We are reversing 50 years of arms control diplomacy, and nobody is paying attention because they're all watching Trump tweet. Homework for you, and I'm serious, this is not a joke assignment. Track 3 indicators through September. 1, the DXY, the dollar index. If it drops below 95, that's a signal that confidence in the dollar is genuinely weakening. 2, the Brent crude oil price. If it breaks above $90 and stays there, it means the Hormuz deal is failing and the war of attrition continues. 3, the number of joint military exercises between the Jeddah pact members. If there's a joint Saudi-Pakistan-Turkey naval exercise in September, then Islamic NATO is no longer an idea on paper. It has become a military reality. And I'll end with a question I want you to think about very seriously. In history, no empire has ever collapsed because its enemies were too strong. Every empire collapsed because of itself, because of arrogance, because it believed it was the exception, because it lost the trust of its vassals. On August 6th and 7th, 2026, 3 groups of American vassals, the Gulf states, Europe, and the global arms control system, simultaneously sent the same signal, we don't trust you anymore. So the question is, when the empire can no longer protect its vassals, who is really the vassal? Okay? Think about that. See you next time.